Welcome back to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts on what you think about this video at the end. Let's get the channel to 20k. With that said, let's get into today's video. Now, some time back, not so long ago, Asian Americans were making trends on social media for their complaints of them not getting admission into colleges even after having gotten rid of affirmative action. Now, we had different people reacting to this issue and a lot was said, but in today's video, I have something that people are linking to Asian Americans. People are calling it the Muslim minority myth. Now, this is a stereotype associated with Asian Americans, and this stereotype assumes that Asian Americans are extra smart, wealthy, high achieving, to mention but just a few. Now, this is why in this video, Amy Chen responds to a comment by an Asian American who I suspect was commenting on the issue of affirmative action by saying that it is not fair for working hard Asian Americans. Check out this video. I will be right back.
The irony is, there are so many things that I would remain ignorant to and therefore not talk about if it wasn't for stupid comments like this that cause me to constantly check and recheck the information that I base my opinions on. With respect to affirmative action and Harvard, during their last admission cycle, Harvard had 2,000 available seats, keeping in mind that nearly 40% of their seats go to legacy admissions. So Harvard had 1,200 seats available to applicants. Among their applicants, 8,000 had a perfect GPA, 3,400 had a perfect SAT math score, and 2,700 had a perfect SAT verbal score. So even if Harvard prioritized GPA and test scores only, they would still be rejecting a majority of their applicants who have perfect GPA and test scores. Now, Harvard employs a holistic approach to a race plus system, which means that if Harvard is going to take into consideration the race of an applicant, they only do so if it enhances the applicant's chances of getting in. They do not do it in a way that harms an applicant's chances. So that means that even the Asian American applicants who were rated low in the holistic approach on factors such as likability, kindness, and courage, it just means that ultimately Harvard did not take their race into consideration and treated them the same as white applicants. Because Harvard only takes race into consideration when it helps, they do not penalize anybody on the basis of race. Now, Georgetown did a study which did show if there was no affirmative action and colleges only prioritized test scores, that Asian American enrollment in colleges would increase slightly. However, the 21% of Asian Americans who are currently admitted through the holistic approach to affirmative action would lose their seats, and those tend to be Asian American applicants who come from lower income families. So when Asian Americans oppose affirmative action, what they are advocating for is for more privileged Asian Americans to replace less privileged Asian Americans in college.
To be honest, the model minority myth is pervasive, which really does real damage, and Asian Americans aren't the only ones it harms. Now, this myth characterizes Asian Americans as a polite, law-abiding group who have achieved a higher level of success than the general population through some combination of innate talent and pull yourselves up by your bootstraps immigrant striving. Now, in short, it makes Asian Americans have that image of the perfect straight A Asian, hence such comments. Let's take a look at this number of stitches and hear what different people had to say about this.
I want to talk about model minority myth, but I'm no scholar. These are just like my personal observations and experiences, but my Korean parents immigrated from the States and I see how that shows up. Specifically during the height of the Asian hate, their initial reaction wasn't like, oh my gosh, why don't the lawmakers care about us? Why don't people in power care about us? Or why aren't they doing anything? It was more so them coming to me being like, we need to be careful where we go. We need to stay out of the public eye. And hopefully we'll be so hidden that they'll forget about us and peace will just be restored. That's genuinely what they thought. And I remember during the height of BLM movement, when I was a little bit more outspoken just on my social media, they were super worried for me. They were like, you are going to get targeted. You are in a dangerous position. Like, we're not supposed to be outspoken like that. To them, we just need to continue pushing this like Asian narrative that we're docile and submissive. I guess generations of this idea being passed down to us has almost translated to not only does political apathy keep you safe, but it makes you like a cooler person. And I feel like I see this sentiment in my generation of Asian Americans. Like, it's almost cringy or icky to be too politically involved or to care too much about social issues. You're a nerd for caring. I don't even think it's about our safety anymore. Like, at least how it's perceived within my generation of Asian Americans. It's like y'all genuinely think you're cooler for not caring. Obviously, I'm generalizing a bunch of Asians because I also know a lot of Asians who do care, but I know there are some Asians who don't care. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts?
First of all, no racial group is a monolith. There are Asians who study hard, there are Asians who don't. There are black people who study hard, and there are black people who don't. And second of all, can we take a step back and recognize how ridiculous it is to compare racial groups in a country that have completely different backgrounds and histories? But in the US, among high selectivity immigrants, African immigrants actually have a higher education level than East Asian immigrants, and in particular Nigerian immigrants have a higher education level than Chinese and South Korean immigrants. So it has nothing to do with Asian or black. But do you know why we started comparing Asians and black people in the United States? It's because in the 1950s and 60s, when the United States was engaging in military actions in Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, bringing democracy to Asia and fighting against communism, as the civil rights movement gained in momentum and attention, people around the world started wondering, with all of the racism and injustice in the United States, who are Americans to go to any other country and tell them how to be? So the United States said, no, Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans are being great. You can look, they're not protesting. They're quiet, they're working hard, they're living their lives, and they're doing fine. The problem is the loud, angry, protesting black people. And do you notice how the model minority myth only ever goes in one direction to make black people look bad? Because let's take the model Asian who studies really hard. Do you know who else they're studying much harder than? White people. In 2021, among 18 to 24-year-olds, college enrollment among Asian Americans was 60%, among white people it was 38%, and among black people it was 37%. So among white and black people it was about the same. But struggling white people do not get told you would be doing better if you were more like Asian Americans with their strong family values and their emphasis on academics. As a matter of fact, when Asians get compared to white people, Asian success is an indication that Asians are stealing opportunities and resources from white people and that we don't belong here.
The model minority myth. It might sound like it's positive, but actually it's very harmful. The model minority myth is a stereotype associated with Asian Americans, and it says that Asian Americans are assumed to be extra smart, especially at math and science, wealthy, high achieving, and obedient or docile. We can see similarities in anti-Semitic stereotypes. Jews are assumed to be wealthy, powerful, all-knowing, and controlling the government. You might not realize it, but these stereotypes are actually really harmful. They paint a monolithic picture of who Asian Americans and who Jewish Americans are by saying that they're all the same, when really both groups are extremely diverse, both in origin and in socioeconomic class, status in society, and more. They're also used to pit minority groups against each other. It's important not to buy into the misconceptions of the model minority myth because they're racist and inaccurate, and they've led to real harm against Asians and Jews in the United States.
We are entering very dangerous territory here. The model minority myth was invented by people to pit people of the global majority against one another and support white supremacy. I like the way that Kathy Park Hong points this out in her book, Minor Feelings. Kathy Park Hong writes, during this period, the model minority myth was popularized to keep communists and black people in check. Asian American success was circulated to promote capitalism and undermine the credibility of black civil rights. We were the good ones since we were undemanding, diligent, and never asked for handouts from the government. There's no discrimination, they assured us, as long as we were compliant and hardworking. Park Hong continues, the lie that Asians have it good is so insidious that even now as I write, I'm shadowed by doubt that I didn't have it as bad compared to others. But racial trauma is not a competitive sport. The problem is not that my childhood was exceptionally traumatic, but that it was in fact rather typical. Capitalism as retributionism, but isn't that how whiteness recruits us? Whether it's through retribution or indebtedness, who are we to become better than the system that destroyed us? The damaging legacy of the West has been its power to decide who our enemies are, turning us against not only our own people, but turning me against myself. It is absolutely true that, statistically, in the United States, Asians tend to enjoy more privilege than other groups within the global majority. But we also need to consider the history of why that is. Asians were generally not stolen from their homelands to come to America. In general, only those who have the means to immigrate to the United States or were smart enough to be recruited to work in the United States had the ability to be here. And that is where this model minority myth was born. It is true that Asian Americans have a different relationship with whiteness than other groups within the global majority. However, the model minority myth was created to pin groups of the global majority against one another, and thus uphold a racist system.
So that's a great video. Please go watch it. I just want to expand on the points made.
Just like mentioned in the previous video, the model minority myth exists to pit the global majority against each other, and it does this through 3 ways. It eradicates our history, homogenizes us, and sanitizes our current lived experiences. The model minority myth leaves no room for knowledge of the ways that Asians have suffered historically on this land and in our home countries because of Western imperialism. Maybe we know a bit about the opium wars in China, but we don't know about the coolie trade. We're never taught the history of and lynchings that happened to Asians on American soil. We also have lost knowledge about Asian solidarity with other racialized groups here in the West. I have a video on my Instagram that overviews some examples of Black and Asian solidarity, but these are things that we aren't really taught, as well as Asian and Indigenous solidarity here on Turtle Island. The erasure of the knowledge of the way that our people have suffered here, and also the ways that we have banded together with other exploited and oppressed peoples, is strategic. It tells us that, oh, you guys got here because your countries were so awful, you worked really hard, and you were just really good, and now you are successful. And this plays into the division between Asians and other members of the global majority. It's meant to be competition to keep us from working together. Like I mentioned earlier, it also completely homogenizes Asians. The Asian experience is vastly different depending on what country you're from, what region of Asia you're from. Are you a recent immigrant here? Are you a refugee? Do you have multiple generations of family that have lived here, or did you just move here? The way that Southeast or South Asians experience the model minority myth is probably going to be very different than the way that East Asians experience it. While we do all live under white supremacy and capitalism, we don't all experience that in the exact same way. And this relates to my third point, which is the sanitization of our lived experiences currently. The model minority myth tells you to associate Asians with doctors and lawyers, successful people. What it doesn't tell you is that in the United States, Asians have the largest wealth disparity of any racial group. It won't tell you about the ways many Asian migrant and undocumented workers are exploited here. We don't hear about the gentrification of Chinatown. We don't hear about the experiences of Southeast Asians working at nail salons. Only that Asians are doctors and lawyers. And because of things like intergenerational trauma caused by racism, fear, self-preservation, a lot of Asians buy into this. They think they just need to prove that they are better than other racial groups, even within the Asian community. It's an insidious trap, but it works.
The model minority myth stereotypes all Asian Americans as intelligent, hardworking, and diligent, and therefore more academically, socially, and economically successful than other minorities. It is a problematic and harmful belief that pits people of color against each other and drives a wedge between marginalized groups. Now, despite its positive implications, the model minority myth only serves to perpetuate stereotypes and has a number of troubling consequences, including negatively impacting the mental health of Asian Americans and driving a racial wedge between marginalized populations. Now, the model minority myth is an example of a positive stereotype, a stereotype that attributes desirable traits to a group. Although it may be a positive stereotype, its impact is harmful towards the mental health of the diverse Asian American community and in relation to other communities of color. Now, assuming Asian Americans are smart, successful, law-abiding, and hardworking may seem like a good thing because these are traits many of us would like to have. However, the reality is that this positive stereotype can lead to problems both for Asian Americans who face unfair expectations because of the modern minority myth and for other racial minorities who face unfavorable comparisons to Asian Americans. Now, what the model minority myth assumes, implicit in the model minority myth, are two assumptions. It proposes that Asian Americans are more successful than other minorities. Now, this suggestion elevates Asian Americans in a hierarchical system that puts whiteness or palm-coloredness at the top while negatively stereotyping other minorities. Now, it implies that Asian American success is based on their own efforts. This suggests that if someone works hard enough, anyone can be successful in America, and by extension, it's the individual's fault if they haven't managed to achieve success. Now, this belief does not consider the impact of systemic oppression and inequality and systemic and structural racism. The assumptions listed above disregard the vast diversity within the Asian American community, a population that traces its roots to over 50 countries, and the unique history of different Asian ethnicities in the United States. The model minority myth also limits Asian Americans to being perpetual foreigners, is harmful to the struggle for racial justice, and minimizes or outright ignores racism against Asian Americans, which is especially concerning assumption at a time when there is a surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans. Now, while the idea of the model minority took hold over 50 years ago, it's only recently that the consequences of this stereotype are becoming better understood. And some of the consequences or impact are that it encourages intergroup rivalry. From the moment Asian Americans were held as the model minority, their success was contrasted to that of African Americans. Studies have shown that even today, the model minority myth is used to negatively compare other racial minorities to Asian Americans. The myth has resulted in increased positive perceptions and expectations of Asian Americans while degrading Black Americans. Now, this is highly problematic and can lead to bias, conflict, suspicion, and harm between the two groups that are pitted against each other by WS. Now, this myth has also been used to justify social inequality. If, as the myth suggests, Asian Americans were able to succeed with minimal help and without fighting for their civil rights, that means the individual is to blame for not attaining success regardless of their race or ethnicity. And this is used as evidence to deny or downplay the impact of racism and discrimination on people of color in the United States and perpetuates anti-blackness. Now, the idea that success is achieved through individual effort perpetuates the notion that America is a meritocracy. This has been used as an excuse to ignore the impacts of racism and systemic oppression and deny social services and assistance to racial minorities and marginalized groups of all kinds. The model minority myth has led to the assumption that Asian Americans are a monolith. In other words, people assume that all Asians are the same. It's believed that all Asians are successful and well off, a notion that ignores the notable disparities in income, employment rates, and educational attainment among Asian Americans. For example, while it's been shown that Asian Americans as a whole are more likely to be college educated than other racial minorities, the data tells a different story if it's separated by Asian subgroups. Now, the stereotype and expectation of Asian American success has resulted in increased depression and people unaliving themselves amongst Asian American youth, and failure for Asian American communities in need to receive acknowledgement, support, and resources, including help to counteract institutional racism at school, work, and public services. Moreover, the idea that Asian Americans are a monolith has led to a lack of research investigating the individual differences within this diverse population. This may contribute to poorer health outcomes for Asian Americans as healthcare professionals overgeneralize, adhere to stereotypes, and maintain unconscious biases about Asian American patients. Now, the model minority myth can also lead to mental health challenges because it places unrealistic expectations on Asian Americans to live up to the stereotype. For instance, one study showed that when Asian Americans internalize the model minority myth, it can lead to increased depression, anxiety, and people unaliving themselves. Similarly, another study demonstrated that the model minority myth can lead to imposter feelings and psychological distress when Asian Americans struggle with concerns that they can't fulfill the stereotype. Now, these feelings can be further enhanced by interpersonal shame. We can go on and on talking about the model minority myth, but what do you, my viewers, have to say about this video? Kindly share your comments down below in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video as I bring you another interesting video.